Just 7 days remain. The 2026 World Cup is about to begin. The biggest tournament in football history. 48 national teams, 3 host countries. Billions of viewers expected to watch around the world. FIFA has spent years building toward this tournament. Everything should be leading to the greatest football celebration the sport has ever seen. But something interesting is happening. The closer we get to kickoff, the more another debate seems to be taking center stage. Not about which team will win the trophy, not about Messi, not about Mbappe, but about the World Cup itself. Over the past several months, criticism has started emerging from many different places. Fans, supporters groups, people who once dreamed of attending a World Cup in person at least once in their lifetime. At first glance, these may seem like the usual complaints that appear before any major event, but if you look more closely, a different picture begins to emerge. These stories are appearing in different countries. They involve different issues, yet they all seem to point toward the same question. Who is the 2026 World Cup really serving? Because just before kickoff, many people are no longer talking about the matches. They are talking about costs. They are talking about accessibility. They are talking about the feeling that the world's biggest football tournament is becoming increasingly distant from ordinary fans. And that is where things become more complicated. The World Cup has not even started yet, but the debates have already spread across the globe. Is this simply a temporary reaction? Or is it a sign that something bigger is happening in modern football? In this video, we will follow each story, each controversy, each small warning sign, to find out whether they are truly connected. But first, we have to begin with the thing that captured the attention of millions of fans: a ticket, and the numbers that many people simply could not believe. If you believe the World Cup should belong to the fans, comment number 1 below. Now, let's take a look at what happened when the first tickets went on sale. It all started with a ticket, or more precisely, its price. For many years, the World Cup was seen as a tournament for everyone. An ordinary fan could save money, plan ahead, and turn the dream of attending a World Cup into reality. But before the 2026 World Cup, many people began to realize that something was changing. When FIFA opened ticket sales, social media quickly filled with screenshots. Discussions started appearing everywhere, from Europe to South America, from long-established supporters groups to people who simply wanted to watch a match. At first glance, it seemed like the usual reaction whenever ticket prices rise. But a closer look revealed something different. The level of frustration was far greater this time, because the issue was not only about high prices. It was also about prices that appeared to change constantly. Many fans said they had selected their tickets, placed them in their shopping carts, and prepared to complete their purchase, only to discover that the price had changed minutes later. For many people, that raised an uncomfortable question. Were they buying football tickets? Or participating in an auction? And that was the moment the debate moved beyond the issue of money. Because when one person cannot afford a ticket, that is a personal problem. But when thousands of people feel excluded from the experience, it becomes a system-wide issue. Supporters organizations across Europe began speaking out. Criticism directed at FIFA became increasingly visible, not because of a match, not because of a decision on the field, but because of a growing feeling that the World Cup was drifting away from the very people who helped make it special, and that is what makes this story so significant. Because it was not limited to one country. It was not confined to one fan community. The same concerns were beginning to appear in many places at the same time. Then something else happened. This time, it had nothing to do with tickets, nothing to do with prices. Instead, it involved a petition that surprised a great number of people. A petition calling on a national team not to participate in the 2026 World Cup. It sounds almost unbelievable, but that is exactly what happened in the Netherlands. And that was the moment the story moved to an entirely different level. If the story had been limited to ticket prices, FIFA might have been able to handle it the same way it had handled many previous controversies. Reduce prices for certain ticket categories, offer an explanation, and continue moving toward opening day. But that is not what happened, because while the debate over tickets continued, another development began attracting attention across Europe. This time, it was happening in the Netherlands, a country where football is almost part of the national identity. A country that has come close to lifting the World Cup trophy on multiple occasions. A country whose supporters are recognized around the world. Then a petition appeared, and its message surprised many people. It called on the Dutch national team not to participate in the 2026 World Cup. At first glance, the idea seemed unrealistic. National teams spend years fighting through qualification. Players dedicate entire careers to earning the chance to play on football's biggest stage. So why would anyone want to give that up? That question is what made the story much bigger. Because the most important issue was never whether the Netherlands would actually participate. They still would. What mattered was that hundreds of thousands of people were willing to put their names behind the petition. And that is what makes the situation worth examining. When only a few people object, it may simply be a personal opinion. But when a movement begins attracting attention across an entire country, it often reflects something deeper. A sense of frustration, a feeling of disappointment, or simply the belief that ordinary people are no longer part of the conversation. What makes it even more interesting is that not everyone signing the petition shared the same motivation. Some were concerned about costs. Some focused on the fan experience. Others raised broader questions about the direction of modern football. At first, those concerns seemed unrelated. But a closer look revealed a common thread. Many people were beginning to feel that the World Cup no longer resembled the tournament they once knew. And that is where FIFA faced a challenge far more difficult than ticket pricing. Because ticket prices can be lowered. Promotional programs can be introduced. But restoring trust is far more complicated. And while these debates continued to spread, another signal began emerging in North America. This time, it was not on social media. It was not in online petitions. It was appearing in hotels, places that should have been filling up with fans as the World Cup approached. Yet the reality seemed to be unfolding in a very different direction. In previous World Cups, there was one pattern that almost always held true. The closer the tournament got to kickoff, the harder it became to find hotel rooms. Prices went up. Fans from all over the world poured into the host country. That was exactly what host cities expected. And it was exactly what many cities across North America had been preparing for over the past several years. But something interesting happened. With the 2026 World Cup now only days away, some reports began painting a different picture. Several hotels in host cities were seeing lower booking levels than expected. At first glance, this could simply be a normal market fluctuation. But a closer look started raising some important questions. After all, the 2026 World Cup is expected to be the largest tournament in history. More teams, more matches, more host cities. So why wasn't demand for accommodation rising as dramatically as many had anticipated? That is when another interesting detail began to emerge. Some fans started canceling trips they had planned months in advance. Not because their national team had been eliminated, not because the schedule had changed, but because the total cost of the trip kept climbing. Airfare, hotels, travel between cities, food and daily expenses, and of course, match tickets. Viewed individually, none of these expenses may have seemed especially unusual, but when added together, many fans began realizing that their dream trip could cost far more than they had originally expected. And at that point, the story was no longer just about football. It became a financial calculation, a calculation that not every supporter could afford to make. But perhaps the more interesting question was this: if some fans could no longer come, who would replace them? Would another wave of supporters be willing to pay the higher prices? Or would empty seats begin appearing in places that were expected to be packed? That is a question not only fans are asking. It is also a question host cities are watching very closely. Because the World Cup is not just a sporting event. It is also a massive economic engine. And when visitor numbers fall short of expectations, the first people to feel the impact are often local businesses. But this may only be the tip of the iceberg, because while fans were calculating costs, an unexpected figure entered the debate. A man who once occupied one of the most powerful positions in world football. And what he said left many people stunned. Part 5. When a former FIFA president speaks out. Up to this point, we have seen fans speak out. Supporters groups speak out. Even host cities have begun watching the situation with a certain degree of concern. Then an unexpected figure entered the debate. Sepp Blatter, the man who led FIFA for many years. The man who once stood at the head of the most powerful organization in world football. A man who understands exactly how the World Cup operates. And that is when things became even more complicated. Because when criticism comes from fans, FIFA can argue that it is simply an emotional reaction. When criticism comes from supporters organizations, FIFA can view it as the familiar pressure that often surrounds major tournaments. But when a former FIFA president joins the conversation, people start paying attention. At first glance, it may seem like nothing more than a personal opinion. But a closer look reveals something much more significant. The controversies surrounding the 2026 World Cup have grown far beyond the fan community. They have become a topic of discussion across multiple levels of the football world, and that is what makes this moment so noteworthy. The World Cup has traditionally been known as a time when football brings people together. Most debates usually focus on tactics, team selections, or the leading contenders for the trophy. But this time, many of the discussions are centered on the tournament itself. How tickets are being sold, how fans are able to access the event, and the growing perception that the distance between FIFA and ordinary supporters is becoming larger than ever. But interestingly, this may not even be the biggest challenge FIFA is facing. Because while these debates continue to spread across the media, another front is quietly taking shape. Not in the stadiums, not on social media, but inside law offices, regulatory agencies, and official complaints filed through formal channels. At first glance, these processes may seem far removed from football, but a closer look suggests otherwise. They may raise questions far bigger than ticket prices or tourism numbers. Because this time, the debate is no longer simply about whether fans are satisfied. It is about whether FIFA is being challenged in the very way it operates the World Cup itself. Up to this point, FIFA could still view the controversies as reactions from public opinion. Fans were unhappy. Supporters groups were pushing back. Some experts were openly critical. But then the story began entering a different phase. Formal complaints started to appear. Regulatory authorities became involved. And that was when the situation became more serious. Because social media can create pressure, but legal action can create consequences. At first glance, these may seem like routine administrative procedures, documents, investigations, requests for information. But a closer look reveals that they all revolve around one central question. Is FIFA's approach to ticket sales and commercial operations for the World Cup truly transparent? That is not a question FIFA can answer with advertising, nor can it be answered through a public relations campaign, because the debate has now shifted from emotion to data, from opinions to official records. And what makes this particularly noteworthy is that these processes are still unfolding just days before kickoff. The World Cup will still take place. The stadiums will still light up. The national teams will still take the field. But behind the atmosphere of celebration, the questions remain. And that is one of the reasons why the 2026 World Cup feels different. Previous World Cups often faced controversy surrounding the host nation. This time, however, many of the questions are directed straight at FIFA. Questions about how the tournament is managed, how fans are treated, and what the future of the World Cup might look like. But here is what makes the story even more interesting. These are still individual events. Ticket prices, the petition in the Netherlands, hotel occupancy concerns, legal investigations. At first glance, they seem unrelated. But when you put all of them together, a much larger picture begins to emerge. And that is where the most important part of this story begins. Let's take a step back and look at everything that has happened. A fan opens a ticketing website and is stunned by the prices. Hundreds of thousands of people in the Netherlands sign a controversial petition. Many supporters begin reconsidering their plans to travel to North America. Hotels in some host cities fall short of their expected booking numbers, and investigations related to FIFA's commercial operations continue to move forward. At first glance, these appear to be completely different stories, different countries, different people, different issues. But if you look more closely, they all seem to revolve around the same question. Who is the 2026 World Cup really serving? And that is what makes this story so compelling. Because most of the people raising these concerns are not opponents of FIFA. They are not against football. Quite the opposite. They are the people who have spent years following the World Cup. The people who buy tickets. The people who travel across the world to support their national teams. The people who create the atmosphere that makes the World Cup what it is. And that is where the paradox begins to emerge. The World Cup has never been bigger than it is today. The tournament has never featured more national teams. Revenue expectations have never been higher. Yet at the same time, many people have never questioned access to the tournament more than they do right now. At first glance, this may simply be a period of transition, a consequence of the World Cup becoming larger, more global, more commercialized. But viewed from another angle, it could be a sign of a much bigger debate. A debate about the relationship between FIFA and ordinary fans, between growth and accessibility, between revenue and experience. And that is why these controversies are not disappearing. Because behind every one of these stories, there is a question that the football world may continue debating for many years to come. Just a few days remain. The debates will soon give way to the opening whistle. Critical headlines will give way to starting lineups. And billions of people around the world will do what they always do during a World Cup. Watch football. Because no matter how many controversies unfold off the pitch, the ball will still roll. Goals will still be scored. Surprises will still happen. And eventually, a new world champion will be crowned. But when we look back at everything that happened before kickoff, perhaps the most memorable part will not be the final result. It may be the questions that were asked. Questions about ticket prices. Questions about accessibility. Questions about the role of fans in a World Cup that is becoming bigger, more global, and more expensive. At first glance, many of these controversies may fade once the tournament begins. One unforgettable match can make people forget a lot of things. The World Cup has done that before. But if we look more closely, these questions will not disappear simply because of a great game, because they are connected to the future of the tournament itself. Is FIFA changing, or is world football changing? Is the World Cup expanding to serve more people, or is it becoming harder to access for the very fans who loved it from the beginning? And that is a question no one can answer for you. Some people will see a historic tournament, others will see warning signs. Some will believe this is simply the inevitable evolution of modern football. Others will argue that the World Cup is slowly drifting away from ordinary supporters. So what do you think? Is the 2026 World Cup the future of football? Or is it a sign that something is changing in the relationship between FIFA and its fans? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy World Cup drama content like this, don't forget to subscribe and join us throughout the journey of the 2026 World Cup. Because the real story may only be just beginning.